days. And when that emergency kind of first started, the first part from my perspective as chief was, how do I make sure that we keep our police department operating and prepared if we had a large number of employees at or we had other problems in the community that we needed to serve, and how do we protect our officers as well. So early on, we put a plan together that would create some redundancies in the way we operate, so that if we did have a lot of people in our department getting ill, that it wouldn't have any impact on public safety. And then also just, taking a second look at the calls we respond to, and the more things that we could push into an online or a telephone format to lessen that exposure potentially with our officers and the community, the better. And that plan worked out really well. So far, we've been very fortunate. We have had a couple people in our department that have gotten sick, but everybody's recovered fine. It's been very minimal, no impact on public safety at all. And then the other part of it too is then just talking through, what does it mean with these public health orders, and how is the most appropriate way to respond to it from a law enforcement perspective, and recognizing that a lot of these public health orders put us in a position that essentially prohibited what used to be constitutionally protected behavior even. So doing that in an appropriate manner where we are more on educating our community. We've worked really well with our code enforcement team out of City Hall to try to avoid law enforcement taking this hardline stance on these health orders. Rather, it's we're all in this thing together, and we're all having these challenges and making sure we're educating people, but yet ultimately knowing that we have the legal authority to go the enforcement route if we really have to. Fortunately, that's not been the case. We have had complaints that we followed up on, and we have not had to go on some sort of hardline enforcement stance at all. People in the community have just been absolutely great about trying to comply with these orders as best as possible. And then, of course, at the same time, it also presents a challenge because as we're all living, these orders are constantly changing, and we start to go one way, and then the order changes and takes us back a little bit. So that makes it also very difficult to do a lot on the enforcement piece. This is something where it's more just trying to have good conversations with the community. Then, just as we thought we were getting used to what COVID-19 was going to look like, then obviously we had the events in Minneapolis and the national protests that kind of spawned out of that. And early on, the direction I was given my department was, we're absolutely going to honor people's First Amendment right to protest and to come out and share how they feel. But we're also not going to allow criminal behavior. And there has to be a clear line there where we're not going to allow people to destroy our city as we've seen in other parts of the country. So the best way for us to do that was to give people that voice. I was out in the protests myself, and that was my part of making sure that people in the community that had these concerns knew that I'm willing to listen, that my department's willing to listen, that we want to keep things peaceful, and it worked really well. But at the same time, I will tell you that we also had a lot of plans in place on how we were going to protect Escondido if people came in that tried to cause some sort of problems. And fortunately, between the work that we did and the work that the community did, it stayed very peaceful. I'll tell you that the first large protest we had at our police station came very, very close to spiraling out of control. We had a group of 4 or 5 men that came in we believe from outside of Escondido, that showed up at the protest in the evening and showed up with backpacks that were filled with rocks, and had opened those backpacks and had started passing out the rocks, and our officers were well aware of it. And they were quickly putting us in a position where this thing had the potential to spiral out of control. And one officer yelling into the crowd that somebody had rocks, and the crowd turned on those people and got them out of there, which it helped us quite a bit as it's to keep things safe. So that's what we've been, how we've been fortunate enough to keep things from getting out of control. And we, as we all know, Escondido is a great community and helped us keep it that way. The interesting thing, I guess the interesting fallout at this point, is all the conversations that have happened throughout the country everything from we support the police to the defund the police and the various areas of debate. And I think, as I've told my officers, I think there's some areas that are important for us to be willing to talk about, and that I think that we are a profession, and a profession is ever evolving, and that we also have to be willing to to look at how we operate and make sure that we are doing that as best as possible to serve the community, to protect the community as best as possible, and be willing to listen. But at the same time, some of those concerns, as I've had conversations with many people in the community, it's been let's focus on what we think is best for Escondido. Let's not try to let ourselves get too sucked into the national points of debate. One idea that may work in Minneapolis may be an absolute disaster in Escondido, or vice versa. So a lot of the conversations I'm having at this point have been, what is the best way for us to make sure that we always have the professional police department that Escondido has always been, but also forward, and we're staying forward thinking. Escondido PD has always done a very good being ahead of law enforcement trends, and I certainly want to keep us that way as well. One of the things you'll see is August 12th. If you have nothing more important to do, I'll be speaking before the 12th, talking about a lot of these same things and concerns have heard or brought up in regards to policing and use of force, and a lot of those kind of key topics that are coming up. So that's kind of where things quick, approach to, and I tried to keep it short because I wanted to make sure I give you guys plenty of time to ask any questions that may come up as well. So.
All right, everybody. I've muted you all while he was talking, just so that there wouldn't be any interference while he was giving us his side of things. So if you would like to ask your questions now and unmute yourself so we can hear what you have to say, that'd be great. Just make sure you click the unmute button, and then you can start with your questions. I see, Ken, you've got one.
Hey, Chief Varso, thank you for coming, and thank you for your service, especially now. I know it's really rough for police departments and first responders across the country, and hopefully Escondido has treated you guys a little better than what we're seeing on the news. I did have a question about your incident there with those gentlemen, or those antagonizers or whatever. Can they and did they get arrested for trying to create an issue? I mean, it's that someone brings rocks to an event like that. I hope they get prosecuted.
So I'm sorry, I lost a little bit of my internet connection there, but I think I got the gist of your question. Yes, you can absolutely be arrested for showing up at an event like that and trying to turn it into something that it's not. They were not arrested that night, and really that just comes down to when you have a small team of officers and about 1,000 protesters, that you can't always go after every single person that is doing something to try to spiral it out of control. So those fellows were not arrested. However, later in the evening, we did have one guy who threw a bottle at the 7-Eleven across the street, and he was arrested. So our approach is always very strategic in who we decide that we're going to go into a crowd and extract, and who we're just going to let it go on and move them out of the way. So.
Chief, was there any indication where those people came from, or what? I know their motivation, but were they community organizers? What were they? I mean, any information on that?
Yeah, not necessarily them specifically. I will tell you though that each one of the protests that we had, we monitor social media very closely leading up to those events. So in a lot of ways, we were aware that people would be coming in from outside, and then we also, we talk with all the other law enforcement agencies in the county and throughout the state. We had learned a lot from what La Mesa faced. Their protests got really out of hand a couple days prior. So we took a lot of the information of what happened in their city, which also was people coming in from outside with the sole intent to create this mayhem. And a lot of the plans we had put into place, especially at our facility, were with that in mind, of creating a much more of a buffer between law enforcement and the crowd, and keeping them building, for example, to just protect things, knowing that we would have people that came in from the outside.
I've got a question just about the general morale of how the police department is doing right now, how your guys and gals are doing that are out there on the front lines. I know when my dad was at the end of his stint at the PD, I remember Ferguson happened, and there was a whole public outcry against the police everywhere, and assuming that they were all, everyone was bad because they wore a badge. I was just wondering, now it seems to be amplified. How are your officers dealing with that pressure of feeling like no one wants them to be doing their job?
Yeah, so it does take a toll because our police officers, from their perspective, they're going out and they're treating people, and they're doing the right thing. And they all recognize, and when you talk about what happened in Minneapolis, every single police officer in my building was adamant of, how did that happen? And that the event played out the way it did. But that doesn't paint the picture of what all the police officers are like. Definitely, what we've seen in Escondido, just as we did with Ferguson, just as we did after Baltimore, is that there's a very loud early response that's anti-police. That voice is still there. But then the community starts coming out also and doing a really good job of showing that most recognize that while even if they have questions about the way we operate sometimes, that they understand we have a job. And the volume of people that have brought food and goodies and notes and cards, and I'm going to try to hold this picture up to my camera so hopefully you guys can see it, but this picture is of our briefing room, and this is all of the letters and notes and cards and gifts, and the rest of our briefing room looks like that behind the photo as well. And so every single card I've gotten, every single email that's been sent to me, we've been printing those out and putting them up on the wall so that every shift of officers that come in, they're seeing that. So for all the negativity that's going on throughout the country, they're also coming in and seeing a whole lot of support out there for what they do every day.
That's great to hear. I'm really happy to hear that you guys are getting those positive notes in too, because I can only imagine the pressure of just, you want to go out and do your job the right way, and you know that you do it the right way, but you have that thing in the back of your head where you're like, everybody's got their phone ready to try to catch me doing something, even though I'm doing the right thing. You got that, you feel like the world's against you. So I'm glad to hear that people are supporting you guys. Don, you had your hand up.
I have a question for Chief Varso. Thanks for visiting us today. The governor's releasing a lot of criminals out of the prisons lately because of COVID, supposedly. Have you seen any effects in our city from prisoners that have been released?
I have not seen, so kind of two parts to that question. I have not had anything to show that there's a direct correlation between the number of people being released and crime. I will say Escondido right now, I'm a little concerned because we've been on multi-year declining crime for quite some time now. And the first month that COVID hit and the jails went on restricted booking criteria, meaning that there's very few things that we were able to put anybody in the jail for. As soon as that happened, we started seeing an uptick in our crime rate. So we've been watching that closely. I do think there is a lot of correlation there potentially from rising crime trends and ability to do much on the enforcement piece.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh-huh.
What types of crimes are you talking about, Chief? What with the uptick?
So as far as what we can arrest for?
No, what you said there's an uptick in crime. What types of crimes were being committed?
Mostly your more petty theft, your lower end theft. Increase in that. And we have seen a little bit of crime, assaults and that sort of thing, but mostly in the area of theft crimes that we're not able to arrest people for.
I got one more question. Has the lockdown caused more abuse at home, more domestic violence?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've been watching that closely because we had read early on that some cities were reporting increases in domestic violence. We have not seen that locally. Our number of domestic violence things it normally is.
Chief, I have one more question for you. Is the PD fully staffed now?
The fully staffed to our area, we usually always have about 4 to 5 vacancies at any given time that we're filling. We're almost always in a hiring process. So with that in mind, yes, we're fully staffed for.
Good.
This last, going into this fiscal year, we did have to cuts citywide. There were some budget cuts that had to happen. So I've had to hold off on filling some positions, but aside from those two factors, we're staffed.
I've got a question here. I know my dad was reading an article the other day. He was talking to me about how some police departments are lowering their standards and the criteria on how they hire because not as many people want to be police officers. And he's saying, well, he was saying that it was good to hear that Escondido PD seems to be sticking to their guns as far as the criteria that they want to keep to have good officers come in. But I don't understand how some of these police departments, I mean, obviously there's not people wanting to apply for the job, but I don't think that they can justify having a lower qualified candidate come in just because they're trying to fill a seat, right?
Yeah, no, Escondido PD has always been a very picky agency. We will pass up on people that other agencies will hire, and frankly, sometimes those people go on and have successful law enforcement careers, but we're not really willing to risk it, right? We want top quality police officers, and it's really interesting, especially right now with the conversations that are going on throughout the country of what the community wants their police officers to be. I've been putting a lot of focus on making sure that we also try to recruit as much as possible from Escondido. I think anytime you have folks that grew up or from Escondido that come on as a police officer, that's a great scenario. This past weekend, we hosted the first ever workshop on our hiring process. So we had about 20 people who are all Escondido residents who are either applying for or preparing to apply for police officer, and it gave us an opportunity to show them and give them a chance to take a practice written exam that they have to pass for a police officer and go through a practice interview and go through our entire process so they understand what it is, with the hope being that, you know, maybe that gives a leg up to somebody who's a local resident interested in being a police officer.
And have you seen as far as the I know there's a whole like political outcry for defund the police. Are we still seeing good support for our funding for our police department here in Escondido? Have been any signs that there's a defund the police movement here in our area?
Yeah, so last month when we took the city's budget before city council, there were a lot of people that wrote responses to city council asking that the police department be defunded or that funding be shifted to other resources. There were also a lot of people that spoke out against that, saying that, you know, public safety is still important. So there is I will say from what I've seen that there is a pretty sizable portion of our community that questions why law enforcement service costs as much as it does, or would like to see that money spent in some other way. But for the most part, people understand that, you know, police officers are still necessary.
Yeah, and I think that from my point of view, understanding from having both my parents be in law enforcement for so long is that, you know, if you spend less on training somebody, then they're probably not going to be as good as they could have been if you spent the money to get them properly trained. You know, they had 30 years of experience to share that with me, and so I'm pretty sure that's probably not a good idea to be taking money away from. If you want somebody to be more qualified, you have to train them. So I'm sure that's
probably, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions for Chief?
Well, I'll just say one last thing. Holly last year had your police cadets come speak at our club, and that was probably one of the best meetings we had. They're just a real impressive group of people.
Yeah, they are. Those cadets, I really do see them as the future of our department. I call them they are our farm team, and if I can find a way to develop and hire every single one of them, very impressive. And it's been really interesting to them and how they've handled this, the anti-police sentiment that's out there, while many of them have friends and family members questioning why they are part of this program. And it's been really interesting to have a conversation with them as well.
All right. Got it. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that wraps everything up for this portion of the meeting. Unless does anybody have any last minute questions? Are we good? All right. Oh yeah, go ahead. Who is that?
One question. It just popped in my head. What is your department's thoughts on what downtown is doing with singling the lanes off and seeing more seating for the restaurants? Are you anticipating that creating other issues with having alcohol outside of businesses and those kind of things?
We've had a really good conversation so far between the police, city hall, and the downtown business. And I do think it's really important for us. So I think the teamwork and the communication that we have going is got me feeling very good that this will be handled in an appropriate way. And I think we've done a really good job of trying to strike that balance where we're being mindful of the alcohol concerns or the traffic safety concerns and making sure that pedestrians are safe as we set this stuff up. And it's worked out really well. So right now I don't have any concerns. I think it's a great plan.
All right, so with that last question, we'll wrap up the speaker section of the meeting, but I do definitely want to say a big thank you to Chief Varso for coming in and talking to us. So a round of applause for him there. Thank you so much for coming. This Rotary year, our theme is Rotary Opens Opportunity. And I know from my personal experience, Escondido PD has definitely opened opportunity for Escondido to be a safe place where we can all do business and live our lives in a civilized manner. And we continue to thank you guys for that. So as a token of our gratitude, I'll come by the station and drop this off for you. It's a little challenge coin from this year. I've got one on me, and then you can have one on your person. And if you see me out and about and you happen to challenge me with it and I don't have mine, then I'll donate $5 to the Rotary Foundation.
All right, I'm gonna hold you to that.
Yeah, definitely. Get that.
And likewise. So
Yeah.
no, absolutely. Thank you for having me today. And anytime you guys have any questions, and I'd be glad to come back.
Very good. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks.
All right, you take care.
See you later.